Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the ScholarAI Founders Pod. Thanks for joining us this week as we wrap up the end of 2023 and head into 2024. Today, we're going to be recapping some of our favorite things throughout this year, some of the things that maybe we were looking forward to but disappointed us in 2023, and then kind of spinning that forward to some projections, some things we would like to see or hope to see in 2024. So, as always, catch us on all of the usual podcast spots and check us out on YouTube. Be sure to leave the comments in the sections below. Leaving anything that you think we might need to touch on. So, Josh, I'll start with you. What are some of the things that you either saw in 2023 or didn't see that you wanted to see?
We'll start with economics. The first thought that comes to mind is that a year ago, the Fed rate was 4.25 to 4.5. We're about 1 point up from that now at 5.25 to 5.5 in the Fed rate. Everyone predicted recession a year ago. It just felt like a matter of timing, but the forecasts were basically consensus that we would have a recession of some kind in 23. Didn't happen. And the soft landing felt incredibly elusive, but here we are sort of now in soft landing mode. The markets have risen considerably. We're close to all-time highs. And I just find that really interesting because no one's predicting recession in 24. So who knows? We very well may have the recession happen in 24 when no one calls it. I find that really interesting. The Magnificent Seven is the economic story. They grew by 80%. The Magnificent Seven, for those who aren't aware, is Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, and Tesla. The S&P 493, excluding the Magnificent Seven, grew about 12% versus 80% for the Magnificent Seven. And the biggest standout there is Nvidia at 238% growth. So, interesting economics.
Yeah, I actually was gonna follow up and kind of cite how the outsized returns kind of catalyzed by those seven companies, and then Nvidia specifically. I'm interested if you've thought kind of at all about if you think that type of growth is sustainable. Are we seeing kind of a peak of Nvidia? They seem to have captured most of the imaginations, both for blockchain technologies and AI with their GPUs. So I'm wondering, do you think they still have room to grow, or do you see kind of competitors coming in, swooping up some of that market cap, some of the market that they've kind of captured?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll go first, and I'd love to hear Lex's take, especially on the A100s and H100 component of this. The demand seems still very high. The average price, I believe, now in the market is about 57,000 for an H100. The A100s, the previous iteration, seem to be getting scooped up very quickly, especially by Chinese buyers who are trying to build their own models. And there doesn't seem to be any abatement of that demand, as astonishing as that is. There are major customers of NVIDIA. Google is working on their own tensor-based chip to compete. Pretty much all of the major buyers in the Magnificent Seven are trying to build their own chipsets to compete with NVIDIA because there is now basically a single point of failure at this level of compute, and there are thousands of these H100s in these data centers. So any kind of loss of supply there would be catastrophic for one of these companies. So you can understand the motivation for creating alternatives, but none of the reports that I've read show alternatives superseding the H100. And in fact, it feels like most of these projects are to risk mitigate rather than compete for the future of chipsets, which sort of suggests that in the next iteration beyond H100s, that NVIDIA will still be the go-to company, go-to provider. So I find that interesting. While it feels like maybe they have peaked, it seems like they're still the leader and still have lots of rooms to run.
Yep. Lexi, you want to follow that?
Yeah, and this kind of gets into the thing I was going to say about like disappointments about 2023. I feel like going into 2023 and like hearing about OpenAI, hearing about Anthropic, all that sort of stuff, I was kind of excited for this idea that this big tech, like companies born out of .com, like early 2000s, like I was kind of excited for the ideas like, hey, like maybe there's like a new guard kind of coming in about like starting a new age of technology, like the old guard's kind of moving away, like a new one's coming up. And my kind of like takeaway from at least the way things have played out thus far is that like acquisition and like partnerships have just become the name of the game. So Microsoft, Google, Facebook are all still in the same spots they have been, right? Um, and to kind of get to the point of what Shashi was talking about, it's the same thing with Nvidia, where like they're the like tech giant for hardware, at least in the like the what the current compute desire is. Um, and I still think it's a little early to see that like, hey, here's a disruptor or a competitor that's actually going to like take a sizable market chunk. It hasn't felt that way to me. It's just like Nvidia's like very, very ahead. And like, again, with a competitive advantage, like as much money as they do have, the valuation they do have, gives them obviously like a lot of room to just keep their spot. So we'll see. That's my thing for 2023. I just wish that there was more like new league coming up, you know, like new players. But it was less of that and more old players sponsoring new players, and that's the way things are going.
Yeah, the Microsoft 49% share of OpenAI is a great example of that. And this is the result of cheap money giving incumbents incredible power. This is the era of almost free money that let the Apples and Microsoft of the world build massive war chests that give them the power to scoop up anything that's potentially a threat. And now that the rates have gone up, it's very hard for new companies to emerge. The IPO market is essentially closed. Even Stripe hasn't gone public yet. And so the exit paths for really promising new ventures, new ideas, new companies is really acquisition. And it's so much easier of a path to take a check from an Apple or a Microsoft than to try to break through that ceiling of IPO.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you guys watch any like Ray Dalio stuff, but he used to be very, very heavy on the idea of that like China's the new rising world order or whatever. But I had read something about an alternative perspective where world orders are not going to be defined by like countries or nations anymore. It's going to be defined by corporations effectively. Um, and the idea then being that like Apple, Google, Microsoft, like BlackRock maybe are already like in those spots and they're probably not going to move for the next like decades. Just as you said, like the war chests they have are just so big that innovation or rather like competition becomes something that just gets part of the world order that's already being made. There's no new spots left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that world order it used to be defined by national boundaries, as you're suggesting. And now the global elite, as it's thought of, aren't bound by that. There's really a homogeneity that's been created among global elites, whether you're incredibly successful in Saudi Arabia or the United States or in China, you kind of live in the same circle. You go to the same places on vacation. You're part of the same online experiences and forums. And so that group is incredibly mobile. And so things like taxation rates that may change the dynamics just aren't as effective anymore, because if one country's tax goes up, this group of people can just move and go live somewhere else and avoid it.
I want to pose maybe a slightly alternative thought to a point that Lakshay raised earlier. Is that I do wonder if some of the growth that you were hoping to see in 2023 is just lagging behind, because my history admittedly isn't rich enough to understand the full dynamics of whether or not we have seen the inflection of these two almost opposing forces overlapping. And what I mean by that is, at the same time we are seeing kind of this paradigm shift with the evolution of AI, we are also seeing kind of headwinds in the economic markets, meaning there's less risk capital, there's less capital being allocated to startups. And in fact, if you leave the AI market specifically, there's almost no capital flowing into startups, right? And so I just wonder if when those economic headwinds become tailwinds, if what you're going to see is companies that build lasting value right now really get their accelerant years down the line, right? So the kind of new companies that you were hoping to see born in 2023, I wonder if those get born in 25, in 27, while actually being founded in these times. And so I don't really know if that's true or not, but it's kind of interesting food for thought, I think.
Yeah, I don't mean to be like pessimistic on like startups or like seeing. It's just more so like, again, like the way I was looking at stuff like maybe a year, 2 years ago was that like, hey, we have Google, we have Microsoft, we have Facebook, we have Apple, right? And OpenAI was kind of coming up out of nowhere and saying like, hey, like we're like redefining how a lot of tech is used, right? I was like, okay, like we have like now a fifth player. That's exciting. But then of course it converted into Microsoft, OpenAI, very deep partnership, and that's the end of it. I do think like there is going to be a lot of innovation. Obviously, like we've already seen that, like there's a lot of AI startups being born that are doing really cool things. It's just, again, like in looking at a world order, I don't know how much space there's going to be for like, hey, Apple, Microsoft, Google, etc., are like old stories at this point. Like now there's like a new generation built off of like a modern age of technology because those companies already have the compute, they have the resources, they have the user bases, etc.
Do you think that below the corporate level, there's really interesting? I'll cite a couple of interesting innovations um, at the product level. Have you seen the Ray-Ban AR sunglasses? That seems like a really cool step change from the really bulky kind of Quest 2s. Even the Quest 3 feels like a pretty substantial headset. But going down to the sunglass level feels like now you can sort of see it blend into the day-to-day experience in a more seamless way. The Humane Pin is coming out. I pre-ordered one of those, so to be determined. But it feels like tech is sort of integrating more seamlessly into the day-to-day experience, the wearables. What do you think about that?
That's what when Dan was asking about what we're excited about for 2024 and on, for me it's wearables. I think like especially as like server costs, AI like assistant costs have become like commoditized effectively, like the potential for wearables has just like gone up significantly. For me, like I did in undergrad, like I guess sort of the focus was like on wearable stuff. Like I did embedded systems, I did wearables course, etc. In the hope to like work on that sort of stuff, like work on hardware, work on software that's meant to be like smart glasses, watches, etc. I'm really, really excited to see like what people cook up, just because the potential for like what technology you can make is no longer bound to like this block of a phone, right? It could be like integrated anywhere. Um, I've already been seeing like demos for like tech on like clothing that like shifts patterns and all that sort of stuff, which has been really exciting. So I think like both like creatively and functionally, like there's this big step change that's coming.
And I think extending those thoughts further, I mean, one of the reasons, my primary inspiration for coming to do a PhD in the specific field that I did it was this kind of underlying belief that as the world progressed with software, there was going to be this burgeoning need and opportunity for wearables, sensors kind of at the point of integration. So whether that be kind of the people that are using it or the professionals that are needing to collect the data, that kind of thing, the opportunity to collect high quality data that can then be passed to all of these systems, I think opens the door for some really, really interesting things. Because as we see, the bottleneck for a lot of these specific machine learning applications tends to be the quality of the data in and the amount of data that you can compile. And if you're relying on human inputs in the forms of fields in a survey, as an example, to be put in, that's simply unreliable, and it's something that has plagued the healthcare system, as an example, for decades, basically for the entire existence. Right when my grandparents, as an example, go to their primary care physician, they simply don't know enough about their own health because of their health literacy and or just they haven't been able to accurately track it since the last time they were there to be able to accurately fill out those forms. So you could imagine if they were wearing something like the Humane AI pin, as an example, or the next generation of the Apple Watch, or pick your favorite wearable, if that was able to simultaneously, while they're just kind of living their daily lives, collect that most valuable health information, you can imagine how much better the treatment of them kind of across their health span and wellness span could be. So anyway, I just think it's fascinating that we're almost seeing a convergence of these worlds as the software has gotten better. The need for wearables, the opportunity for wearables, I do think is growing and will continue to grow exponentially, especially as we begin to see the crossover of innovations in the chip space for AI coming onto platform, right? So think about the new things that were possible with the new M series chips for Apple, as an example. I think that's really fascinating. And then kind of taking the conversation in a slightly different direction, just based on Shashi's comments of the Meta and the Ray-Ban glasses. I actually had my first experience with the Quest 2 in recent years. So it had been probably 3 years since I had tried an AR or a VR headset, and tried one recently and was pretty blown away. And it was always intuitive to me that gaming was going to have a kind of some real estate occupied in that space. But I think the thing that's more intriguing to me is the idea of low-cost experiences for live events. And I'll use an example. The most recent Eras tour for Taylor Swift, right, was sold out basically everywhere. My wife waited in an online queue for like 2 hours to get her tickets. And so she had to fly to a different city in the United States, right, in order to like get this experience. I can envision a world, and we can debate the timeline about when this is kind of realized, where rather than having to fly to that city, rather than having to pay hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars for that ticket in person, you can get a low cost virtual experience in which you are witnessing that event in real time in kind of this virtual ecosystem that is facilitated by these, AR or VR devices. And from the ticketing side, from the company's perspective, that seems highly attractive to me because it's essentially an infinite amount of virtual seats that they can sell for these real in-person events. And then one more additive thought to that before I pass it to the two of you. I actually see it as being incredibly valuable in the world that exists currently in the streaming ecosystem, because the only real things in the entertainment business that provide urgency are live sports and live entertainment in general. So concerts, Broadway plays, those kind of things. So I'll pause there. Shashi, why don't we start with you? Just any of that you want to react to, add thoughts to, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and in my notes for 2023, Taylor Swift did an incredible job monetizing her brand, her content. She went straight to market with her film version of her concert, which I believe grossed $250 million. So just incredible work by Taylor Swift. I went to the Sphere for a U2 concert, and as you talked, Damon, about experiences versus in person versus virtual, the Sphere experience is. I'm not a big U2 fan. I went to see the Sphere. I went to see the unique kind of experience that the Sphere presents, and it was totally worth it. It was a great experience. The seating was great. The volume modulation of the Sphere was really unique in that they set it up such that every seat felt like it wasn't blaringly loud. You go to a concert and it feels like the volume's on too high if you're too close to the speaker. Every seat, I believe, was designed to have kind of a nice sound flow where it didn't feel like the volume was exceedingly high, but you got kind of a clear signal of the highs and lows. The screen itself is magical. I mean, it's a special experience. It's the kind of thing that I think would be valuable even in a world with really great AR, VR capabilities. And I think there will still be demand for those kinds of things. The Taylor Swift concert in person, the Sphere attendance in person, just to see it and feel it. So I continue to think that those will be big draws, even in a world with really great AR, VR. I do think there's room for AR, VR experiences, especially if the social aspect gets solved, such that you're sitting there watching the sports game or the concert with your friends who may be around the world. I can see that really being the magnet that brings people together, and the headsets, just the simple kind of physical experience of the headsets becoming easier, simpler, more convenient. I can see those two things converging to create a new market there. But I don't think the market, at least my estimation is that market isn't going to erode the in-person experience market.
Yeah, and one clarifying thought, or just to add to what you're saying, is I actually agree 100% that it doesn't replace it. I actually think it's additive. So, I mean, there's still going to be the same demand for a Taylor Swift ticket as an example, but instead, if you either can't be there in person or maybe you can't afford the tickets because there aren't enough of them, you can, similar to how people were attending the movie premiere, right, of the Eras tour and kind of having their own concert experience in those movie theaters. You could imagine a similar thing in VR. So again, just to say, I agree with you. I think the in-person experiences will still kind of reign supreme, so to speak, but the AR VR adds another layer that enables people to interact in a way that wasn't previously available. And I think for those live events, it's just really interesting. So, Lowcost, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I mostly agree with what Shashi said, or like at least perspective on in-person versus immersive experiences. Shashi, with the way you pitch the Sphere, you might lose me for a weekend. I'm going to go find a concert next year. I will not be replying to Slack whatsoever.
I'll do it with you. Let's make it a team field trip.
All right, cool.
We'll do our pod from there.
Yeah, the speakers are great. It'll be fun. I think like the AR VR in my experience has been like super fun. I have an AR headset. And there's this like one game I tried out where it's like you're basically like Spider-Manning across the city. And I want to like throw up after I was done with it because it's all first person. But I was having a lot of fun, just like sweating, like coming out of it. I think the thing to me that like I feel like is the biggest gap I'm still waiting to feel that's cleared is that the social experience still feels like two separate entities having to like coordinate something. You know, it doesn't feel like a fluid experience to say like, hey, I just want to hop into this immersive world and like hang out with my buddies. You know, it's more so like, hey, I have three friends. We all own this piece of technology that's still expensive. We go and plan this thing, and then we have this shared experience that we have to coordinate a little bit, right? I think the sort of like idealized version of AR VR that I imagine is that like you throw on a headset and kind of by default there's just like an experience kind of ready to go for you almost. Like it doesn't feel like you're hopping into something that's structured, if that makes sense. Even in my head it sounds a little bit like nebulous, but I think what I'm trying to get at is that like right now the market adoption of VR isn't like heavy enough to create like a lot of highly populated, like really large scale experiences. At the same time, like the adoption of the headset, the usage of the headset still kind of bulky, right? Um, it's not like it doesn't feel like you're hopping into one world from another, like going from the real to a technological, like virtual world. It feels more so like I'm in the real world for a little bit. I'm just going to like play like an advanced video game, really. I think like the more the former happens, the better VR will get overall. Like the more the experience will have like a great spot for a piece of technology that everyone has. I'm excited overall. I think more about like mixed reality and AR than pure VR as it stands. I think like I grew up like watching Iron Man movies and seeing like holograms and stuff. Like that's the dream right there. If I were to do a PhD, it'd be on that sort of thing. If I can figure out holograms, I'd be happy. I'll go sip pina coladas for the rest of my life, knowing I made holograms.
Let's take the conversation to Zuck and Elon. There's this thread that I want to try to weave here, which is I think Zuck was brilliant, but timed it poorly with AR VR. I think he was about 4 years too early in the massive amount of capital expenditure he put into the mixed reality space. And I think it will show up. It will probably show up in a way now that it's sort of, now it's in the trough of disillusionment in the Gartner adoption curve. Everyone's sort of written it off as this thing that will never happen, and now I think we will start to slowly see it in the slope of productive use. And as the headsets get more convenient, the UX gets smoother, as you're describing, Lekshay. I think now we're going to get to really practical applications. But the thread that I want to try to draw is that I think both Zuck and Elon are in incredible positions of power in this data space that we're heading into. And what I mean by that is that the assets that Zuck has with WhatsApp continues to get more and more use as people become weary of being contained within either the Apple or the Google ecosystems. So the WhatsApp usage has continued to grow. They've added features. Facebook continues to have a great platform where people share their content willingly, provide it with free value to train on for future models, and then the AR, VR capabilities that are emerging on the back end of that. Elon is also in a great position in this data space in terms of training proprietary AIs. With Tesla, I would argue no one has more high quality data than Tesla in AI training. You add on to that Twitter and SpaceX and Starlink, particularly with all the data gathering capabilities there. There's just an incredible amount of data. Both Elon and Zuck are really smart and they play the long game. And I can see that from the point of departure between Elon and Sam Altman with OpenAI, that Elon has sort of laid the groundwork for the future war. The future war being this AI, robotics, proprietary data, processing, compute power. All of these are the battlegrounds. And I can see how even the Twitter acquisition was a play along that future war. and I think they've both positioned themselves really well in the future.
I mean, I'll start. I think that you're probably right in that Facebook, now Meta, might have moved slightly early into the space, but in some ways it feels a little bit like a chicken and the egg story, meaning that like had they not moved in, we might be the same 4 years removed that we were when they were 4 years ago, essentially. And basically they might have needed to make that capital infusion and that kind of massive pivot in order to kind of propel the space overall into kind of what it is now. I also agree in somewhat that like it does feel like it's a technology that has been largely written off, and time will tell whether that is true or if it is kind of in its, like you're saying, if it's kind of trough dissolution currently. I don't know. I think it's fascinating the kind of thought that you propose as far as its ability to kind of aggregate data. I think number one, it's true. I think secondarily to all that is this idea around personalized experiences, which get heightened in a world of AR, VR. And so speaking specifically to Meta, if you think about their primary business model being the selling of ads, go back to my earlier thought. If while simultaneously you are front row at your Taylor Swift concert in your VR headset, there's a side roll of ads specifically tailored to you during that entire time that is both inside in your consciousness, meaning that you are aware of them, but not intrusive enough to actually interrupt the experience. And that kind of seamless integration, of advertisement seems to be along the playbook that Meta has historically run, especially as people have migrated away, younger generations specifically, from the core Facebook offering, right? Instagram is going to have some staying power, but I don't know anybody around my age that spends very much time on Facebook. And that's not to say that there won't be some sort of, rebounding, but it does feel like younger generations are migrating away from the platform. And Josh, you said it well, and that especially globally, WhatsApp is kind of maintaining market dominance and growing steadily. Leading that, I'm fascinated by the plan that it seems from the outside that Elon is running right now, both the data acquisition from the full self-driving of the Tesla, being able to expand internet access, and the data acquisition that comes with that with Starlink, and then obviously the kind of public square that is now X, formerly Twitter. So I think I don't have a ton to add to anything that you said, other than again, I think that as an operator, Elon Musk has shown that he is incredibly committed and usually is sometimes overly ambitious in the thing that he is playing. And so I think that you said it well when I do think that whoever owns the richest data set is going to be positioning themselves well. And right now it does feel like places in which people are volunteering their content are going to have a foothold there. And along that similar thought, just as in closing, I would throw out, that's why it's so intriguing to me to watch Google's progress in this, because it seems like YouTube is kind of the public town square for video, which in some layers adds dimensions over some of the other content platforms. And so I do think that if Google is willing to go all in on these things, that they will be significant players for obvious reasons in these kind of data wars, if you will. Why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like the thought about Elon specifically, it just never occurred to me to think about this way, but he had mentioned earlier that the way he looks at like kind of like the X brand is sort of making like a WeChat that's like more international, not just bound to China, right? And when I like think about the parallels, like Tesla's cameras are recording real world all the time, like able to collect real world like visual data, audio data, etc. Like Starlink obviously has a lot of like geographical data, all sorts of stuff. And it's interesting to think about like the way China's data and tech infrastructure exists is something that like Elon's effectively creating, using Twitter, using Tesla, and all sorts of stuff. There was this funny meme from a while ago where Elon's basically setting himself up to own Mars by creating like boring tunnels for transportation, having Tesla solar panels to power everything. Tesla is like running across auto self-driving between cities. And it's interesting to just like, when you mention that positioning, Shashi, it's actually like kind of like realize like, yeah, that can't actually work. Like he owns a lot of like, or rather he could own a lot of like the data and tech infrastructure of real world with the way he's currently set up. I think as things go forward, obviously like mobile has been like the way that data is being collected by a lot of these big companies. Like we rely on our iPhones, we rely on our Androids, and everyone kind of has that as a lifeline, but then becomes like the main data ingestion point for all of these companies. So I'm curious as to like what's going to happen, especially moving to wearables, especially as like new entrants like Humane come up. I think more than anything, I'm going to be very, very curious as to what happens with neural interfaces, and how that ends up playing into data collection. Because obviously that gets very, very interesting if you're directly reading like brain signals and like in a year of 2050, like what are we doing with those? Is it ethical? What are the laws we're going to write about that? I don't know.
It's interesting because I think that if you would have propositioned the idea of smartphones and this idea of invasive technology 50 years ago, people would have, on face value, kind of scoffed and said that's an impossibility. And in some ways that I think people would currently say implantable devices are an impossibility. It will be interesting, in 30 to 50 years to kind of look back and think, how much progress has been made there. I think for some, obvious cases where they're being used to treat medical conditions, it seems like a very obvious path for people, but you can imagine not so many leaps beyond that where if, people are gaining outsized, value by having these implantables. Or eventually, I think you could envision a world in which they become mainstream. Josh, do you want to react?
I'm interested in seeing it. I still think we're 5 years away from having a real meaningful discussion about implantables, brain signals. So not a lot to say on that one.
I think turning your attention is kind of maintaining the thread of future looking. Lexi, why don't you start us off and tell us something that you're kind of looking forward to in 2024?
Yeah, I had mentioned like with like technology landscape in general, like wearables are exciting, and obviously we talk a lot about them. I think more broadly, I think with the way that big corporations are adopting a lot of technology and like kind of exposing them, I think we're coming up on a lot of like meaningful innovation. And so insofar that like a lot of PhDs have shifted their focus like building on top of like corporate commoditized tools. A lot of the startup ecosystem can kind of rely on like almost like a like leapfrogged almost evolution where like, hey, one startup's figured this out, another startup kind of takes those ideas and makes something new. I think like the flow of innovation is gonna like accelerate very quickly. And just that so much technology and so many changes are coming. We've seen the start of that this year from going from like text to image to video. But I think like we'll see it happen in a lot more dimensions this upcoming year, which I think will be exciting.
Josh, you want to react to that or share some of the things you're looking forward to?
Yeah. I've got a long list here, but I just want to take a second to react to Shohei Ohtani's $700 million contract. Incredible, stunning contract. The deferral is pretty crazy too, but just the top line number and the Dodgers spending over $1 billion, and just sort of reflecting on that compared to where the Mets were last year. The Mets went on a spending spree last year and basically weren't in contention at the trade deadline and ended up selling off their best players. So it's fascinating to see. And Shohei won't pitch this year, so he's a very expensive designated hitter. But do either of you guys follow sports contracts?
Yeah, I do. It's interesting. It comes at a time I think that's particularly fascinating as a juxtaposition to some of the biggest contracts we've seen in the NFL, namely Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson, and those not working out at all. So I'm not necessarily speculating in one way or another for Shohei's contract, but I do think that what you're seeing is as the global value of these sports teams continue to rise, owners are willing to write bigger and bigger checks to make a splash at the box office, so to speak, because they recoup a lot of that revenue in ticket sales and jersey sales, etc. But those dollars don't necessarily translate, and in fact, recently have almost negatively correlated with on-field or on-court success. So it's fascinating to watch. I actually quite enjoy the economics of sports. Baseball, particularly interesting test case because there's no salary cap. So as you're saying, you can have a team that spends in perpetuity essentially, so long as they're willing to pay the luxury tax. And in the Dodgers case, with Shohei deferring a lot of it, they're not even falling victim to this luxury tax. So it's fascinating, regardless. So.
Yeah, it's going to be a win. This is going to be a major win for the Dodgers. He will more than pay for his contract with TV rights, with jersey sales, rights to every endorsement and advertisement with the Dodgers. So this will be an easy financial win. Whether it translates into wins on field, to be determined, but I'm not sure it really even matters. His contract is justified easily by the financial impact that he'll bring in, as well as Yamamoto's follow-on contract, and it builds a great brand in Japan. It's a great branding, marketing win for them to have those two guys join the Dodgers. So I think it's a smart move, brilliant financial move. It's a clear plus on the financial bottom line, a big unknown on the wins and losses bottom line.
That's fascinating. I hadn't heard about this. I was just like reading an article while you guys were talking about. Crazy. Wow. I have no like concept about sports like contracts or anything like that. I just like watch tennis and that's the extent of it. And I was reading this, like every like line down the paragraph was like, huh? every further line I'd go. That's crazy.
Yeah, the last stupidly high-priced contract was Mike Trout with the Angels, who was Shohei's teammate last year and last few years. Mike Trout has been a very good player, but the Angels have not won basically anything since Mike Trout's been on the team, and so that's sort of instructional in a way. But I think if the Dodgers ended up in that situation, they would be hugely disappointed if they don't actually win, since they've already got a really good team on to add Shohei onto. But even then, I think they'd be happy to take it. Just to add a couple of science thoughts, Damon, I'm curious to get your reaction to GLP-1 blockers, and came out in 23. They seem to be gaining a lot of broad traction. What's your thought in terms of whether that continues to be a trend in 24?
Yeah, I mean, arguably it is one of the most, that and alongside the recently approved or FDA approved CRISPR therapeutic for sickle cell anemia, are arguably two of the most important, medical breakthroughs over the last several years. I mean, I think that, especially if we leave the, COVID vaccines and the mRNA in general out of it, but I'm incredibly optimistic. I think in some ways the jury's still out, right? Anytime you're treating this many people at scale with a new drug, in some ways, some of the second order side effects and things like that are yet to be determined. But I'm very optimistic. And then speaking about it from a health perspective, I think it feels like a net win, right? Because it not only does it seem like people are suppressing appetite, which is leading to lower weight, lower rates of hyperglycemia, the things that lead to diabetes and other diseases, but it also seems to be acting as some sort of an impulse control. So we're also seeing in these patients rates of alcohol abuse, gambling addiction, these kinds of other things falling, anxiety included in there. And so I do think overall it seems like a net win. I think I'll hold final reservations to kind of watch how this plays out over time. But overall, I'm very optimistic with these drugs. It does kind of beg the question of, are we going to be titrating everybody, or at least 80+% of the population on these drugs in a controlled way? Because I don't know. Well, I'm not an expert in these. I have been following them fairly closely, and these drugs do need some level of titration, meaning like there's a dosage optimization for each person, and in most respects, some people do need to ramp up dosing over time to kind of have the maximum effects. So I don't exactly know what the long-term health effects are going to be, but I think I'll wait patiently to kind of make a final conclusion on all those. Leaving the conversation shortly, just for a moment here. I'll speak on the health aspects of it, but jumping down into business, I'm also just fascinated to see what the second order effects of these things are. Like, are we going to see a dramatic dip in the stock price of McDonald's, as an example, right? Or in some of these other fast food chains and those kind of things. So I'm fascinated both from a purely humanistic standpoint and also from how this affects the broader economic markets. I think is a fascinating thought. So I'm happy to field more specific questions, but kind of that's my bulk general reaction to them.
I'm not up to date on like GLP-1. Are they clinical trial stage drugs, or is this on market already?
Sorry, Ross. They're in practice, so people can have these.
Okay.
So the weight loss effect there, the most common one is Ozempic, and it's kind of a off-label effect. So originally they were just there to treat diabetic patients, but people were realizing that people were experiencing dramatic weight improvement, meaning weight loss typically, while they were on these drugs, and they are now off-label for specific goals of weight loss or controlling obesity for patients that are pre-diabetic, but then also a host of other diseases. So there's still ongoing clinical trials to try to determine, as I was alluding to earlier, the long-term health effects, both positive and negative, of these drugs, but they are in clinical practice currently.
Taking the effects of the GLP-1 blockers with the cultural trend of younger people choosing not to drink has a really interesting future prognosis on kind of the alcohol market, which has just been seen as a default up and to the right business model, but now gets kind of significantly brought into question with alcohol abuse potentially being tampered, and culturally people in their 20s not drinking nearly as much. The rates of kind of deciding not to drink alcohol is significantly higher. You guys can speak to this, much younger than I am, but it seems like the default in my cohort in the kind of late 30s to mid 40s cohort was everybody drank significantly kind of most days of the week in college, or at least a couple of days a week in college, and sort of the default behavior. It seems like that's changed pretty significantly.
Yeah, I'll go first and let Lakshay finish out, since he was the one of us that was most recently in college. But I think that's right. I mean, it's a fascinating observation, and I think as an additive thought to it, I would also say that as more and more drugs are legalized in other places, and people can, kind of replace what used to be kind of an alcohol only habit with other drugs, whether that's marijuana or otherwise, I think it'll just be fascinating to watch and to see if the rates of that continue. So no real thoughts other than my generation also drank a lot in college, but that being said, I had several peers that abstained then and have continued that abstinence throughout their adult lives. So yeah, Lakshay, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I mean, as y'all know, I don't drink, but I think like in general, like my perception of it while I was in college is that like drinking culture is still pretty heavy, like especially with the school we went to where there's a big social frat culture. Inevitably, like drinking is part of that. But I think like increasingly so, I think there's just like an awareness of people like my age, a little bit younger, a little bit older, where like you think more about like I guess the ramifications of like choices and whatever. And so like I know a lot of friends who like if they want to partake in like some kind of drug, it's usually like edibles rather than drinking or smoking, right? Just because like you're acutely aware of like, yeah, like in the long term, drinking's probably gonna hurt. In the long term, smoking's probably gonna hurt. So at least edibles, I don't know if there's any like studies going on as to like long term impacts with those, but there's a general perception that hey, this is safer than these other two. I think that I think in general, like, and maybe again, this is just speaking from my own perception, there's just this desire for like a variety of experience where I think like drinking kind of has become like a normalized, I guess, sort of like downtime activity. Like, hey, like this is a go-to way to have fun, especially in college. But once you're out of college and like young adult, like there's a desire for like more different ways to have fun with your time, right? And that means like going outside more, like especially in an age where like a lot of us grew up like bound to technology. There's just this desire to be like, hey, my way of having fun is like running marathons. My way of having fun is like going backpacking with my friends, right? And that's just like a different shift from like I spend my Saturdays in like a bar, right?
It feels like, at least from my view, that your generation, Lakshay, is more aware of the health impacts and also more clear-eyed about feeling like crap the next day. Whereas my generation sort of took it for granted that we're going to feel like crap tomorrow, and that's just table stakes.
Yeah, and also keep in mind I'm from Oregon, so any any opinions on drinking versus marijuana and nature and whatnot are very heavily weighted one way. So keep that in mind. I might not be speaking the same way a Northeasterner would.
It is true. It is interesting on that, like, very precise line of thought there. So my wife and I again spent time in New York City in last February, and then we're actually headed there tomorrow as well, just for the New Year holiday. But I was kind of taken aback by the number of people who were smoking in public there. I don't necessarily mean just the raw number, because obviously New York is heavily populated, but I mean, as a fraction of the people, I was kind of surprised. And again, I don't know if that's just, I don't really have any peers that smoke cigarettes on a regular basis. And the amount of like cigarette smoke that was occurring in New York City did really surprise me. And I think, Shashi, your point, it does feel like younger generations, my generation somewhat included, are at least a little more eyes wide open to the health ramifications of some of these things. And like you're saying, we are a generation, again, mine and younger, who do go to the gym more as a hobby, not as a life saving measure, which was commonplace 40, 50 years ago. And so I do think that all of that has kind of significant ties to where you're kind of leading with this line of thinking.
Feels like a good time to throw in two products I really like in 2023. I've been using both On Running and Hoka shoes, and I'm a big fan of both. Right now, I'm wearing my Hokas pretty much as my daily wear, and I'm a big fan of them. I'm a big fan of the kind of versatility and comfort of those. And then second product, also health kind of related, Athletic Greens, AG1. I take that one every day, and definitely feel good doing that. Whether that's placebo effect or a genuine health effect, unknown, but certainly feels like it's positive.
My wife would second the Hoka and the On Running opinion. Those are the shoes that she finds herself gravitating towards as she has shifts. So she's an advanced practice nurse, and so those are 12-hour shifts at times. And so she gravitates towards something that is comfort over everything else. And those are the two brands that she most commonly cites as the one that she wants to kind of wear. Supplements conversation is probably one for another day, just because it's longer. It's a fascinating one to have. I'm neither hardline for nor against. I think under the right circumstances, they can be purely additive and a great thing. I think in other circumstances, they're used as a crutch to not eat broccoli, as an example. But what I will say is, as a fascinating anecdote, is in college, the only what are called Category 1 supplements that are allowed under NCAA and subsequent rule is creatine. So there's a handful of supplements that are kind of backed by science, if you will, and there are some other ones that remain kind of more speculative in nature. But the one thing that I will say as a commonality amongst them is that what you do find is almost a perfect correlation of people that take supplements and health conscientiousness. Meaning that, like, you are kind of, if you are taking supplements, you are investing in your health, and therefore there are tangible benefits of that, even if they don't come directly from supplements themselves. So I've not really ever seen it be a problem unless people are kind of taking them excessively. And then basically the solve there is you have to make sure you're hydrating so you're not overworking your kidneys. But again, longer discussion. I do know an unfortunate amount about some of these things, but we're all very good. Okay, we are kind of at time. So thank you all again for joining us on this week's version of the ScholarAI Founders Pod. Please catch us here next week as new episodes are dropping weekly. Catch us throughout 2024, and thank you all who have tuned in thus far. See you guys next time.